Hey everybody, welcome back. Today is going to be a repost, but it's a repost on a different channel. Today is game day, so I'm going to be going over, or at least I have been going over, the three different aims in life in Risk of Rain 2. Now, take it for what it is. My voice is a little scratchy because I think by the time I came out with it, I was a little sick at the time, but whatever. Try to take in the text and the context. It is a pretty neat game, and the aims that are in it are pretty relevant of life, and I think any game that is going to try to touch you or me as a person is going to have some kind of semblance on the mythic story that drives you and me. So sit back, relax. It is one I typed up and read from a script, when usually I kind of do a lot of this stuff off the cuff. So I hope you enjoyed.
Risk of Rain. The name itself speaks of the unknown, yet known in a low resolution in regards to a slight sliver of the future. A disturbance in the weather is on the horizon. Rain itself in small doses is nourishing, and a vital component of life itself. A little bit of chaos adds to creativity and is necessary for life. The ultimate possibility on either end of risk is success or failure, all or nothing, and has the result of creating a relationship with what one might be gambling with. When one has no knowledge of what is to be risked, one travels into the ultimate chaos of the unknown, as the reward could be as little as maintaining one's current level of means, while at the same time one might forfeit their aim in life, or life itself, in the name of risk with a capital R. When the game was first introduced, there was no story. One would land on the planet and would, in a sense, be assaulted by an ever-ascending wave of challenge that would threaten to drown you unless you could match the pace of the flood that the planet rains upon you. Some are better swimmers than others, so the game offers different difficulties pending one's desire, challenge, experience, and ability. The only thing you'd be risking would be your life, so the moral element was a non-issue. The opening cinematic, which was introduced later, had the captain standing in proper posture, pondering the risk of answering a distress call. It seems a moral question is asked by the game, then answered by the player. The character is not a hero in a transcendent spiritual or religious sense, but morality itself seems to be bound up in a relational value system, and when one hears a lonely cry for help amidst the silent songs of light beaming from the stars and suns, one might ponder the risk. Determinism would denote an almost immediate response, but the mere act of pondering the risk puts more weight on the individual, the weight of decision being, how much is another conscious life worth? To do nothing would be to say that the distress call has no value, but to answer the call, one not only affirms the value of language and consciousness, but perhaps the reward could be akin to the treasure of a dragon. Not in any material sense, but in the knowledge that if one could overcome the unknown dragon, the fear or master over the potential flood might be easier to manage. For once one fights a dragon and overcomes, all other challenges are thereby smaller in comparison. So the player then has the luxury of jumping into their landing pod with their aim to validate the distress call, and the floods begin to rise. All people know that a flood is coming in their own life. If anything, this is recognized in the human common denominator of death. Death itself can be looked at as being a motivational factor for making time itself increase in value for the sake of continued consciousness. Death also gives a reference point for experienced time, as infinity in any direction regarding past or future would render it impossible to gauge where one was in the river of time caused by the rain. This undertone of slight anxiety is sung to us through an amazing soundtrack, keeping an ever-humming theme of tragedy in the background. So then the question becomes, what is one doing to prepare for the flood once one takes responsibility for someone else's suffering, especially if that responsibility carries real threat to one's own life? Once one picks up the suffering of another, as in answering a distress call, one's life will now be undoubtedly harder, but possibly infinitely more meaningful. The game then gives you three aims to carry this burden toward, which are surprisingly more real than you might think. For time is directional, and if one does not choose their aim, the flood of life might just carry one through rapids, over waterfalls, only to be crushed by the rocks below, which might happen anyway, as the risk with a capital R must be real to be meaningful. But the worst thing one can do is neglect having any aim at all. Aim 1. Looping or growth. As with other roguelikes, I mentioned growth in the sense that when one looks back in their own life, they understand where they've come from and how they've improved. That motivation to succeed is amplified by measured improvements. almost as if nostalgia has the power to be drawn upon into the present and help carve a better path into the future. This focus on growth for growth's sake fuels success, but can also fuel drug addiction. When taken to an unhealthy extreme, there are certain boundaries necessary for life that one cannot violate or life itself will cease. As apparent in some of the Steam achievements of the game, some of these benchmarks will even cost you your life. Looping itself could be paired with the karmic reincarnation cycle present in almost all religious thought east of Eden. If one is good in one life, one might start again, but higher on the karmic spectrum, hence the level changes. The standard for good being how well you can keep pace with the ever-rising flood. It's a religion of works, however, and if one is not paying attention, a lucky shot, or lapse in judgment, will take you out and throw you to the bottom of the karmic cycle with a bit of red flavor text. One can, in theory, loop indefinitely, but one of two things will always happen, if that is one's aim: fatigue or system failure. One will eventually succumb to weariness as they hit a plateau and the caffeine level fades, or the game will crash at a pure absurdity. Aim 2. Obliteration. If you've ever studied or read about Buddhism, this option makes a lot of sense. The story of Gautama Buddha goes something like this. He was a prince sheltered from all pain and suffering, even the appearance of it, by his father the king for all of his childhood. During his early adult years, he was exposed to people in poverty, disease, and death. It shocked him so much that he came to the conclusion that all of life is suffering, and the only way to escape the madness of karmic cyclical suffering and tragedy is to opt out. Commit spiritual suicide in order to escape existence on one's own terms. Through the various life cycles, one can lose their individuality as they may come back as anything, but in an odd way, one can retain their identity by opting out. But the identity is etched into the minds of those who have not opted out, hence the lunar coins, as this is the realm of conscious thought. The person who has reached nirvana retains nothing, as is the nature of oblivion. The Disney version of Sleeping Beauty has a similar setup. As she is raised in a forest where the animals literally sing to her, she falls in love with the first guy she meets, and he leaves, and she seems to come down with PTSD, magically finds the only spindle in the kingdom, and willfully thrusts her finger upon it, knocking her unconscious forever. Anyway, for a while these two aims were the only two options in the game. Aim 3. Align with the moon. The only way to really leave the planet in a physical sense is to first be teleported to a desolate moon filled with strange and difficult guardians, with none of the regular chess generations granted to you on the home planet. The game is different here. This actually makes sense in a relation to tyranny, or when something or someone has a tyrannical hold over your life. When one tries to overcome a bad habit, or a thing that is holding one back, things get way worse before they get better. Drugs have their withdrawal symptoms. The Israelites wandered the desert for 40 years after escaping basically slave labor. Even moving into a new house is a whole process involved with financial drain, labor with the movement of material objects, and learning to be comfortable in an unfamiliar environment. Once you navigate the postmodern desert of the moon and overcome its dragon Mythic, who assaults you verbally in multiple ways while assaulting you physically, a counter starts, and you're given the opportunity to race to your ship before the moon explodes. For a desert is no longer a desert when it is fully tamed and overcome. I really do like this ending, as its direction is up and out rather than an eternal cycle constantly bashing you back to square one with no transcendent goal or story to take from the experience. From the story perspective, with the agency of distress, one has reached into the almost infinite potential of the future with risk of possible floods and dragons unseen, and emerged victorious with the dragon's treasure. The treasure being experience one can draw upon to help them aim into the future, making all other unknown dragons seem a little bit smaller, or at least a little more familiar. Or perhaps, more in our case, readying us for more floods and dragons that the awesome developers continue to throw our way. Thanks for watching, and take care.